Dr. Larry Golson, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. It's great to be back.
So, Larry, a repeat guest here. I would encourage you before we get into this topic to go back and listen to an earlier episode that we did with Dr. Golson. I believe it was episode 24, where we're going to build on the topic that we talked about there. And it's a really interesting system that you have been implementing in your practice for quite a while. And no pun intended here, but I've seen it gain a lot of traction in other offices, and that would be EOS. I'm going to briefly tee it up, Larry, and then I'm going to ask you to maybe for those who aren't familiar with that system, to just give a recap of that, and then we're going to go into a more specific element of that system. But it's EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, which I believe was introduced and made popular in the book Traction, for those of you who like to read, by Gino Wickman. And a big part of our conversation last time involved accountability as part of that system. And we're going to lean more into that today, that accountability component. But what I'll ask you to do first, Larry, is maybe just recap for those who aren't familiar with that system. What is EOS?
Yeah, sure, Steve. Well, I guess I could tell what EOS is to the audience through a story. And my story around that comes from my own practice, which I opened cold in 2008 and grew it to a point where I had about 8 to 10 team members. And my office manager came to me at one point and she was like, Dr. Golson, listen, I love working with you. I love this practice. But it's like every time we take 2 steps forward, we take 1 step back. And I just don't understand why that's happening. And I give you 6 months because I can't continue with the practice if it's going to be like this. And I might have told this story in the last podcast, but it's what brought us to Traction, because a week later I was at a conference and I was telling this story of what my office manager told me to my consultant, and he turned around and he grabbed this book and he said, you need to read this with your office manager. And the book, of course, was Traction. So I went back home and I bought a copy for her, and we both started reading it, and we started to realize why this is like really helpful because it organizes all the major components of the practice. And so Traction itself is built around 6 parts to gain traction. One part is the vision. So it's, the why of why we exist. Simon Sinek says, start with why. And so, first defining what our purpose is as a company and what our values are, our core values, and then creating, beyond that, a 10-year picture and drilling it down to 3 years, 1 years, and even 90 days to see kind of organizing where we're going. So that's the vision component. Then there's the people component, which we'll dive into more today, which is organizing the actual team itself into a hierarchy with specific roles and details on who reports to who. So it organizes the actual team. The third part of Traction is the data component. And so we've talked about measuring KPIs, key performance indicators. And through Traction, we create a scorecard where every week we're looking at the metrics to see how we're doing as a company. The next part of Traction is the process component. And so the fourth aspect of Traction organizes processes. So bigger than SOPs, standard operating procedures. The processes are a little bit bigger, and we take 80% of what we do most and we organize those into distinct processes. And the book goes into a lot more detail about that. The fifth component of Traction, Steve, is the issues component. And that's where I like to call it, when I work with clients, long-term parking. So these are issues that aren't going to get solved right now, but they're still important to the practice's success. And through the exercise of prioritization, we're going to put these issues in a specific spot, and then we're going to pull those off of the issues list to solve as time goes on in an organized fashion. And the last component of Traction is Traction itself. And so the sixth component is, after getting all of these other steps into motion, we start to get traction and we start to move forward in an organized and effective manner. So that's the basic kind of organization through the EOS of Traction, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And once we implemented this, it took us about 1.5 years to really get this thing going in our practice. We saw amazing growth, both in our team members and our practice financially. But for the first time, it was sustainable growth. So it didn't feel like we were just like running crazy. It was like we actually had organization, structure, and clarity. And so it was like the kind of growth that we wanted. And my office manager, is still with me today, and she helps me in the practice still as general manager. And she also helps our clients through Sherpa Consulting develop and implement traction in their practices.
Thank you for the recap. I'm curious if we go back to the story that you told about your office manager, that she came in and she said, Dr. Golson, it feels like every time we take one step forward, we take two steps backwards. And I'm curious on the difference that traction has made in terms of your mindset toward leadership, because I think a lot of owners might find themselves in that situation because they've taken on the role of ownership very one-sided. It's my strategies, it's my vision. I'm going to basically operate this. All my employees are kind of like chess pieces, and I'm just going to move them to where they need to be, where I think they need to be. You had a very interesting situation there where an office manager came to you and said, "This just isn't working for me." And you're at risk of losing somebody. It sounds like was a very valuable member of your team. Before we get into the accountability part, I'm curious if you could expand on that a bit. Has traction allowed you to look at leadership differently and realize maybe put less pressure on yourself to have all the answers? But my understanding of the premise of the EOS is it brings everybody. It's more team oriented, and it gives everybody a stronger role in the success of the business, which might make it less likely that somebody comes to you and says, Dr. Golson, I'll give you 2 weeks, but this just isn't working for me. So does that make sense? And I'm just curious if the system has allowed you to take a different mindset toward leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what you mentioned about chess pieces. That's the exact model that I started my practice in. My vision was pretty strong for how I wanted the practice to run. It's my practice is called Envision Eye Care for a reason. And I saw my team as almost like they're like chess pieces to do the bidding of what I wanted done in my mind. And it was more of an authoritarian type of approach. That was the model I was given from the generation before me, and that can work. And it worked to a certain point until I started to realize this is not working, and I have to understand what the word leadership actually means, because I don't believe I really had a firm understanding of that for the first probably 5, 7 years of running my practice. And so the difference really, Steve, is having a team that has to work for you versus a team that wants to work for you. And having that team that wants to work for you is going to be a completely different level of performance out of the same exact people when they want to do something versus they're told or they have to do something. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Traction helped me realize that I needed to understand what leadership really meant and how getting the team to collaborate together we're way smarter than any one person alone. And so the first thing I did when my office manager came to me was to thank her. Even though it was kind of scary for her to say, "You got 6 months, buddy, or I'm out." I was like, "Oh gosh." Well, first of all, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to like right the ship. Because when it comes right down to it, it's on me as the owner. There's a book called Extreme Ownership by Steve Jacko. I believe that's his name. He's a Navy SEALs, and he talks about ultimately the success or failure of any organization is based on the leader, success or failure. So I realized that I had to change my ways, and traction was certainly helpful to understand collaboration because by design, it sets it up that way. I think that there's other books as far as leadership specifically. The one I think of is 100X Leader by Jeremy Kubicek, and that really describes how to actually carry out leadership, which was super helpful for me to understand more about it. But it's like any skill, we weren't taught as optometrists how to lead, and we were taught how to be an optometrist. So if you apply that same idea to leadership, we have to learn. It's incumbent upon owners and managers to learn the skill of leadership so we can gain that collaboration that traction sets up as its structure.
We've all heard, I think, that core component of leadership is building other leaders. I mean, ideally, if you're doing it right, you're starting to see other people develop their own leadership skills. Was your manager in coming to you in that way? Was she sort of maybe even subconsciously or maybe even not subconsciously saying, Dr. Golson, I don't feel heard?
I think that that was part of it. I know that was part of it because what was happening and what happened the whole time before that was we were stepping on each other's toes. If she would tell somebody, you can't have that time off, and then the same person would come to me and ask, and I'd be like, sure, you can have that time off, and not even realize that she had said no. And so that's where the accountability chart's so helpful because you start to realize like who does need to be the one, telling other people what the boundaries are, what we're going to be able to do. And her coming to me to tell me that was basically her saying, um, if you're going to put me in this role, then let me be in this role and respect what I'm going to say, because if you're contradicting me, then we're creating chaos. And so there was a time also, Steve, because of the way my brain works, I'm kind of like here, there, and everywhere. Um, I think that's common with entrepreneurs is that they're kind of have that squirrel brain. And at one point, she came to me, and this was another gift, just like the one we've already discussed. This was another gift. She said, Dr. Golson, sometimes when I say something to you, I don't think you're listening to me. So from now on, when I really need you to hear me, I'm going to look at you dead in the eye and I'm say, Dr. Golson, I need you to hear me on this. And it was kind of like a moment where something clicked in my brain, and she practiced this out in the next few months to where I started to really actively listen. When she came to me and said that, it was like a light bulb went off. Okay, I need to stop the squirrel brain and let me focus in on what she's saying, because this is really important. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And through that process, um, we've become much more capable of interacting together in a positive way, and one where we respect each other when we're talking.
Does she know my wife? Because I hear that a lot here at the house. It doesn't seem like you're listening to me.
They might know each other. I don't
It
know.
seems, it sounds very familiar. Before we dig into the more of the details around the accountability chart, which I want to get into, I want to ask you about this idea of letting go of control. And you mentioned the word authoritarian, and I hear it all the time. And here's what it sounds like from owners, and it's usually an overwhelmed owner. They'll be talking about all the things they need to do, and this is the phrase that'll come out: I just can't do it all by myself.
Mhm.
And it comes out in a tone of overwhelm. And sometimes I have to remind owners that you have a team. We forget. Again, it kind of goes back to looking at the employees as chess pieces as opposed to human beings who can contribute. And I don't know if you're familiar with the book Who, Not How. Great book. If you find yourself feeling like a micromanager, you just can't trust your team, read that book and it'll really make you aware of how self-limiting that is when you don't look outside your own capabilities. But I'm curious that a lot of owners, they seem like they're trapped between wanting control and needing help. Why is it so difficult to let go of control?
Yeah, I would say that I can tell you from my own experience and those of my clients is we decide to take the responsibility of practice ownership because we do have some level of vision, and we do have a desire to carry out care for the patients and care for the team in a certain way. And I think the word that comes to me when you ask that question is the word trust. And I really think it's hard to relinquish responsibilities to others because of trust. And I think that the main concern there is that this person can't do it or won't do it the way I want or as good as me. And I had a different consultant tell me, because I've had a lot of consultants through my years, I still work with plenty, to help me. And one of mine at one point said, if somebody can do something 80% as good as you, that's got to be good enough. And you need to delegate whatever it is to that person and elevate their role so that you liberate yourself from whatever that task might be. And that number 80% really stuck in my mind. And it's interesting too, Steve, because sometimes that 80%, once a person is empowered to do that task or whatever it is, they end up doing it better than I did. And I had no idea that that was going to be the result, but that happens over and over again where my team gets better at a certain skill that I thought I was like so good at, that they're actually able to do it better because they're more focused or they have the better skill set for that exact thing. And so I think it comes down to trusting that our team are capable, that they are capable, and then giving them a chance to do it. As long as it's not $1 million mistake, let them try something. And even if they make mistakes and they learn something, that's still a win.
I think that's so important what you just said. And two things come to mind. One is a lot of time, I hear that all the time. I was afraid to let my staff do it, but then when they did it better than me, or they came up with better ideas. I went to them and said, "What are your ideas? I've got my ideas. They're not working. What are your ideas?" They come up with ideas. A lot of times I think we forget that they're on the front lines and they see a lot of the obstacles and challenges and bottlenecks that we don't see. But if we don't give them the space to tell us, then they might just keep that to themselves. And that's what happens in an authoritarian environment is people just don't feel like they have that, I guess the psychological safety is the buzzword, right? So there's that aspect of it. But there's the other component of learning from mistakes. So what? So they make a mistake. Like you said, it's not $1 million mistake that you're going to lose the practice, but you make mistakes too. I make mistakes too. But a fear that if I let my staff do it, they might fail at something. Great. Learn, embrace failure. That's how companies keep growing. I mean, you look at any company that gets ahead, and what you will find is a long series of mistakes. I guarantee they've made a lot more mistakes than the practice or the business that just doesn't seem to grow because one is taking the chances, experimenting with things on a small scale, failing, fixing the mistake, learning from it, where the other company is playing it safe. And that is the riskiest thing you can do is play it safe, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that some of the most successful people in business and some of the most successful businesses are the ones that have failed the most. And there's plenty of research and literature out there about that. Simple Google would, bring up a ton of results for that. And at this point, I guess even more, I'm trying to let my general manager, the same person we've been talking about, her name's Christine. She's great. She's been with me for over 10 years. And I'm asking her now to basically run the day to day so that I'm stepped out of the practice and I'm just getting information. And she's coming to me when she needs some help. But otherwise, I'm not like directly influencing what she's doing. And what I am doing is I'm telling her the result that I want. So whatever result that might be, the doctor has booked out a certain amount for a month, a certain percentage of comprehensive exams or a certain amount of revenue growth this year. So I tell her the result and how she gets to that result is up to her, and it used to be where I would come and I would give the answers and I would try and dictate how we did it and have that control. And I've just relinquished that control. I'm still there if she needs me. It's not just like I'm like, good luck, go, go for it. But at the same time, it allows her to go figure out how to get our schedule booked. And she came to me at one point. She's like, I don't know how to market. And I said, well, you know what? I don't either, but I'm asking you to go figure it out. And I know you can. And darn if she didn't go out and figure it out. And, we're doing better than we ever had with marketing because of that. So yeah, there is a level of inherent, I need to let this person have some free reign. And as long as we're getting the result that we're after, then it doesn't really matter how we get there. And oftentimes, to your point, Steve, she's more involved with the work that directly affects her and comes up with better solutions than I ever could have imagined.
So you mentioned the term free reign, which I'm sure makes a lot of ODs very nervous. But behind that is accountability. So let's turn theory into application because the EOS system is very much a system. We take theory and we systemize it. So what is the EOS accountability chart?
Yeah, the EOS accountability chart, a lot of times it's called an organizational chart. And, that's a term that others might know. In terms of traction itself, the accountability chart, it starts with, it almost looks like a family tree or something when it's in a chart. And there's a visionary, or oftentimes the owner is at the top. Below that owner is the what's called the integrator, which another term for that is like office manager. And then depending on the size of the practice, if it's a small practice, it might just be, below that, several boxes of different individuals on the team that report to the integrator. But it's a visual to show who reports to who and who's responsible for what, because in each one of those boxes on the accountability chart is someone's name, their title, and maybe 3 to 5 things that they do in the office that they're responsible for. Kind of big buckets. It's not a job description. I often have to remind clients when they're making their accountability chart, it's not a job description, but 3 to 5 of the main activities that person does in a given week or month. And then if it's a bigger practice, underneath, so you got visionary, integrator, and underneath that is going to be 3 boxes with different departments within the office, maybe clinical, optical, and operations. And then those departments underneath those boxes. So it kind of fans out and it almost looks like a pyramid to show, again, who reports to who and who's doing what. And so it becomes very clear that the visionary shouldn't go around the integrator to tell someone they can have time off or not have time off, because that's not my job anymore. So it kind of by itself, it liberates the visionary from some of the day-to-day. And the trick of it is to adhere to it, because you can create the accountability chart, but habits die hard, right? So if I've been doing this thing for a number of years, it's hard for me to remember in the moment, this is not my job. I need to direct you to the integrator, or I need to direct you to your departmental manager to answer that question. But essentially what it does is it gives structure and clarity to the team. And most of the time when potential clients call me to work with Sherpa Consulting to implement traction, the biggest things that I hear are the issues is structure and clarity. Over again, clarity, structure. I need more structure. I need more clarity. And this is the chart or the tool that offers that solution.
So, Larry, in your experience in your own office and working with clients on this, let's take an office that's done things, like you said, habits die hard. So let's take an office that's done things a certain way for a long time. There's a doctor, maybe you've got an office manager. That's your org chart, right? And then you got all the revolving employees under the office manager. So to build out something a bit more robust where people report to one another, I love the model. What are some challenges that a practice might almost expect? Because change management is a part of this as well, and getting people to see things differently, getting people to adopt and embrace a different way of doing things. And almost everyone I've talked to who's implemented the EOS model into their system will say at the end of the day, they love it. But there were a few bumps along the way. There were some employees who weren't there once this was implemented. The changes just weren't something that they were going to adapt to. But from just a realistic standpoint, somebody looking at this going, okay, sounds great in theory, but to just walk into practice on Monday, have this, and I'm exaggerating the roadmap a little bit, but I think you get what I'm saying, to build something that's pretty considerably different than the way you've done things for a long time. What are some of the road bumps you might expect? And I think my mind is going to staff's willingness to embrace the system, but also if there's any potential friction among the different staff in terms of, oh, I have to report to her now or him, that's my boss. Where can things go wrong there, and how might you get in front of some of those issues?
Yeah, what a great question, Steve. There's so many answers to this question, and I think the first thing that comes to mind is, number one, creating the accountability charts with the most likely depending on the practice size. I've seen it done most effectively with the visionary and the integrator collaborating on it, because what wants to happen here is that when the accountability chart is unveiled to the team, is that it's been vetted, it's been thought about, it's been reviewed, edited. Sometimes private conversations are had. This is a big one, because the first time that the team hears about it, we don't want one person to be really surprised, like, wait a minute, I'm reporting to who? And this happened actually in our practice when we unveiled it to our team, and we had a optician that was probably 20 years into her experience, and we picked one of our patient care coordinators and moved her over to be the head of the optical department because she had such great leadership capacity. But the one that was there for 20 years was like, "Are you kidding me? I just found out about this in front of the whole team." She was embarrassed. She was upset. And the next morning, she didn't come to work, and we never saw her or heard from her again. So that was a big mistake. And I would say that, private conversations are important to make sure that people understand what's happening before the whole team is, it's not that everyone needs to know, but the ones that are delicate or the leaders might sense this could be a source of friction. I would advise having that before unveiling it to the team. But going back to building it with the office manager, um, and this takes time is another thing that I've noticed, and that the owner that's seeing patients 4 or 5 days a week sometimes doesn't have the capacity to really implement something of this nature, this size. And so I encourage my doctors to have help from other doctors to see patients so that they have time to work on the practice, not in the practice. Um, the other the other important aspect of it that I've seen as a roadblock is owners get worried about, well, am I going to have to pay people more? And the answer is yes. You will have to pay people more to be in these leadership roles, but it's easy to lose sight of the fact that this is not an expense. This is an investment. It's an investment in your people, and it's an investment in your practice, and it's an investment in yourself because you're going to delegate things and liberate yourself from certain things that you probably, as an owner, shouldn't be doing anymore, anyways. And so, making sure that you have the right budget for it is important. And the last thing I'll say about that is, having a coach or having someone to help you make these decisions is often very helpful. And the best athletes, musicians, and actors, they all share one thing in common, and they have coaches. So as an owner or as a leader in an organization, it is helpful to have a coach because change is scary. And so not only is it scary to like put these people into places that make sense for the practice, but it's also important that when the accountability chart is unveiled to the rest of the team, that it's the right messaging. Because as leaders, we are meaning makers. In other words, we make the meaning of why something is changing. And so it's important to be either coached or to understand the reason that we're doing this team is because we want to help provide structure and clarity. As the owner of this practice, I want to start with an apology that it's not been as smooth or as organized as it could have been. That's on me. But we're turning a leaf, we're drawing a line in the sand, and to help all of you, we're going to make this more structured and more clear so that people know what's happening and how to conduct themselves throughout the course of a day or a course of a week. So, really making the meaning is important because if it comes across as change for the sake of change, that's not too inspiring. If it comes across as, oh, this is the flavor of the month, and next month we'll be on to something else, and this isn't going to stick anyways, also not that inspiring, or not a good way to follow, right? But we want to create good followers to leadership, and we want to add that structure in, and so we need to communicate in a way that the team sees what's in it for them, and that's really important. If I'm on the front line of the team, what is in it for me for this change? Because this sounds kind of scary. Change is scary for humans. And so we have to explain, like, succinctly and impactfully why this is good for the practice.
Larry, where do you feel that other people on your team need the most coaching? Because you mentioned the value of getting coached. Now we're putting people in roles that they might not have had to do before in terms of leadership. You've got people reporting to you. Again, looks great on an org chart, but in theory, I'm assuming that there needs to be some guidance to the different people on the team. I cite a study that was done at Harvard University once where I forget the number, but it was not an insignificant number, but they surveyed people in leadership and management positions, and 50% of them classified themselves, there was different categories, classified themselves at horrible at holding others accountable. And the thinking behind this was it's just not something most people are comfortable doing, is putting yourself in a position that could become confrontational. So in my, I do some speaking, and I've really thought about it. I've looked at the research and I try to present accountability in a way that doesn't feel confrontational. It does not have to feel confrontational. We won't get too far into that at this point, but is that an area that you feel like you need to coach the other people on your team before you just put them in a position where they're going to be set up for failure?
Yeah, what a great question, Steve. The answer in one word is absolutely, because accountability is not a bag of bricks that we're hitting people over the head with, right? Accountability is something that is shared, so it's as important for the leader to be accountable as it is for the team member. And we're going through this in my practice right now, where our clinical manager has just given her letter of resignation because she wants to go to PA school. We're very sad to see her go, but we're very excited for the next chapter in her life. And we have a lead medical assistant that we're considering promoting into that position. And our lead medical assistant is arguably the hardest worker in our practice. She's the best doer of things, but doing of things is not leadership. Leadership, if we look at 100% of the time that we spend, and when we're in that position of doing, maybe we're doing 80% of stuff and then 20% of leadership. When we move somebody from a role of that over to true leadership, they're only doing 20% of stuff and they're doing 80% of leadership. And so teaching somebody those skills is paramount to their success. And we can't just put them in that place and not give them coaching and developmental skills. And then if they fail, get upset with them, because real and truly, we have to provide, 100X Leader talks about this, the right calibration of support and challenge. And so as we're multiplying, you mentioned the word multiplying earlier, as we're multiplying leadership, and we're the reason I called it Sherpa Consulting is because we're trying to help people, climb to higher levels of altitude on the mountain, of elevation on the mountain. And we can't really give away what we don't have. So the first thing I want to say about this is that I was talking to a client up in Canada, and it was a husband wife. The husband's the doctor, the wife is the integrator or manager. And I started teaching them leadership. And at one point she said, "Gosh, I thought you were going to just teach me how to lead people. I didn't realize that it started with me." And I said, "Yeah, you have to learn these for yourself. Before you can't give away what you don't have." And so the first step is really learning the skills of leadership. And then after that, we can give away the skills of leadership to somebody else and help them be successful. So as we're helping them be successful, we're challenging them to be a leader of people. So this individual I was mentioning, the medical assistant, she's great at doing, but can she lead her team, the ones that she's been friends with and they're in the same room hanging out? Can she lead the doctors? An optometrist, associate optometrist, she would be ahead above them on the accountability chart and the way our structure is. And so we're asking her to basically manage doctors. And yes, we absolutely have to help her, conversation by conversation, experience by experience, learn how to be effective in that role so that she can build the skills to be an effective leader.
Yeah, Larry, as we close out here, I'll share something with you that it became painfully obvious to me 10 years ago when I transitioned from practicing OD into more of a consultative role, doing practice management consulting for practices. And I started to hear some of the same issues over and over. Revenues are flat, we're not growing, various issues related to the economic health of the business. And the more I really started to peek under the hood, the more I started to notice that it wasn't what the practice thought it was. It wasn't just, this can be multifactorial, right? But it wasn't just my patients don't want to spend the money or it's hard to find good people. What I started to find is that consistency was a leadership void. And it started to become painfully obvious. More and more I looked and saw there's nobody in charge here. Yeah, your revenues are flat. Nobody's driving growth. Yeah, your staff is a mess because nobody's really holding them accountable. And I think that news is somewhat revolutionary to a lot of practice owners that haven't looked in the mirror before. Like you said, that owner that you were working with said, I didn't realize how much of this was my understanding how to be a better leader. And I would tell anybody, if you're running a practice, if you're thinking about going into practice, is learn leadership. You're never going to understand it fully, but there's just no excuse. It's so important. And there's a million books out there on leadership, podcasts, you can take classes on it, but just continually keep investing into that side of your knowledge. So, Larry, as always, I love the topic. I think it's so important. I appreciate you coming on and sharing. Where can people find out more about Sherpa Consulting if they want to hire you to build this system within their own practice?
Yeah, we're online at sherpaconsulting.net, and I can be emailed at drg@sherpaconsults.com. And for me, Steve, the I love when I became an optometrist, I love delivering patient care, and I did that for years, and I still do some, not very much anymore, because as our practice has grown, I've been able to step further and further from the day to day, and I have a true passion for helping practices, whether it's implementing traction or leadership or better ways of communication. Touching on something that you mentioned is that there's no way that we're going to grow our practices without conflict, because conflict happens. And how do we have truly healthy conflict so we actually have a good resolution at the end of it? And I just love it's so much psychology. And at this point in my career, I just love helping other practices do that, because I've made so many mistakes and I still make mistakes along the way. Like you said, leadership is always something we're learning. And, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk to your audience, because you have such a great following and a great podcast series for private practice and helping us be competitive in a really challenging market. More and more so. It's not going to get any easier for us. It's only we're got to get better at it. So I appreciate what you do, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Likewise. Thanks so much, Larry. You mentioned psychology. Another area I'd recommend learning about human psychology, because so much of that is very important in a service-based industry. But we'll have you come back on a different time to talk about that. Thanks so much, Larry. I appreciate your time.
All right, Steve. Thank you.
And thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.